There is a stretch of land in the American Southwest where water disguised a canyoned world. Glen Canyon's steep walls and winding corridors slipped beneath a growing reservoir, and for decades Lake Powell held them from view. Now, as levels fall, familiar surfaces return like pages lifted from an old book. In 2026, along receding shorelines, something linear catches the eye, a long, remarkably continuous rock face called a wall by those who boat, hike, and survey here, emerging from water towards sun, wind, and open air once more. First questions arrive quickly and fairly. How long has it been submerged? Why does it appear so straight, even measured against surrounding cliffs and benches carved by water and time? And what do its clear lines tell us about the shifting boundary between lake and land today? It is not a modern barrier, not an installation, and not a recent placement. It has been here all along, now simply uncovered, framed by beaches of drying sediment and the pale traces of former water lines. Lake Powell is itself a reservoir, not a natural lake. After Glen Canyon Dam closed in the mid-20th century, the Colorado River rose, drowning canyons, alcoves, and side channels under tens of meters of water. Over time, the reservoir extended across more than 186 miles of winding waterways, and in places descended to depths approaching 560 feet. What had been a complex canyon system became a broad, navigable water body that redefined the region's appearance and use for generations. For decades, lake levels hovered within expected ranges. Shorelines rose during wetter periods, retreated during dry spells, and recreation continued atop a canyon held in suspension. But in the early 21st century, the pattern shifted. Extended dryness across the Colorado River basin reduced inflows, even as downstream demands held steady. The result was a gradual, persistent decline. By the mid-2020s, the change was no longer subtle. Broad shelves of lake beds stood bare, framed by stark mineral rings. Along newly exposed margins, two worlds appeared side by side. In some coves, decanted sediments formed steep, drying slopes, cracking at the surface. In others, bedrock terraces and vertical faces re-emerged, features not seen since before the reservoir. It is within this setting that the wall has come into view, a long, continuous rock face running with unusual consistency compared to the broken, irregular forms around it, a boundary-like line etched across the lake bed. From afar, it reads like an edge, one material meeting another. Up close, the story grows more intricate. The surface shows layering, bands aligned in horizontal lines, each the imprint of deposition or the record of erosion tracing weaknesses through the rock. Parts are smooth and continuous. Other stretches are fractured into blocks, shifted slightly out of alignment. Speculation about construction fades as scale, context, and geologic logic align toward natural origin. Sedimentary rocks dominate this region, sand, silt, and finer grains laid down over millions of years, then compacted into stone. These layers create striking bands of color and texture, reflecting ancient environments now preserved in cross-section. Erosion, water, wind, and temperature, carves those layers into edges, ledges, and faces that can appear engineered from a distance. The wall fits this pattern, a plane of weakness or resistant bed traced out by time, not tools. Its visibility today is not because it formed recently, but because water stepped back. For decades, the formation lay beneath tens of meters of lake, sensed only indirectly. As levels dropped, first hints appeared, ribs of rock at the margins, then fuller faces emerged. Lower portions remained coated in fine sediments, smoothed by underwater time. Higher sections show weathering by air, wind, and temperature swings. Together, they create a gradient that reads like a timeline on stone. Beyond the formation, The landscape records change in plain sight. Marinas and ramps once flush with water sit above dry ground. Metal fixtures that anchored buoys are stranded in hardened mud. Sections of docks, cables, and markers rest far from present shorelines. These artifacts, innocuous and ordinary, trace the lake's retreat with precise honesty, each a fixed point now separated by growing distances from the water that once defined their purpose. Exposed canyon walls add their own annotations. Vertical faces show scars of past rockfalls, with debris fields at the base marking where slabs broke away. Some stretches look stable and smooth, others are jagged and irregular, shifting toward collapse. The interplay between stability and change is visible at every scale, from hairline fractures that widen grain by grain to benches that detach in a single event, an ongoing conversation between gravity, material strength, and time. Within this shifting setting, the wall functions as a clear reference. Its linearity, contrasted against the canyon's more chaotic textures, makes change easier to track. As water steps back, additional segments appear to extend its length, revealing subtle differences along its face, variations in grain, cementation, and fracture spacing that guide how each part responds once uncovered. Harder beds tend to retain sharper edges. Softer layers begin rounding and slumping more quickly. Hydrology sets the tempo. Lake Powell is fed primarily by the Colorado River and tributaries. Releases through the dam maintain supply downstream. When inflows fall below releases, levels decline. In recent years, that imbalance persisted. Measurements place the reservoir well below historical averages, at a fraction of full capacity. The consequences are visible: broader shorelines, lengthening beaches, and the progressive return of features that reservoir waters once concealed from view. Mineral bathtub rings mark former waterlines like contour lines on a map. These pale bands, traced along canyon walls, record not just how far water fell, but how quickly. Wider spacing hints at rapid declines, tighter spacing points to slower transitions. Against these markers, the wall's position becomes another measuring stick, its newly exposed sections aligning with the story told by stains, beach terraces, and stranded artifacts scattered across the basin. Along the boundary between submerged and exposed ground, mixed signals stand out. Areas that are intermittently underwater may carry thin coats of fine sediment, then dry and crack when lifted into air. Edges smoothed by long contact with water begin to roughen under wind and daily temperature swings. This transitional zone, neither fully aquatic nor fully terrestrial, highlights the dual forces that now sculpt the formation and its neighbors. Step back, and continuity becomes clearer. What seemed localized begins tracing a longer path, connecting segments separated when the reservoir was higher. The wall follows the canyon's natural geometry, often aligning with a structural plane or boundary between layers of differing strength. Rather than an isolated anomaly, it reads as part of a larger geologic feature, an expression of sedimentary architecture revealed by the retreat of water. Composition varies along its length. Some sections present compacted sandstone with relatively uniform grain. Others include finer, weaker materials more prone to break down. These contrasts govern behavior after exposure. Resistant beds maintain crisp, wall-like edges that first drew attention. Softer intervals shed grains, undercut or slump, forming aprons that soften the profile. With time, the formation evolves, its sharpness diffusing as it exchanges water for wind. Weather accelerates the shift. Daily temperature swings expand and contract rock, prying open fractures a fraction at a time. Strong winds, common across open canyon reaches, lift fine particles, exposing fresh surfaces. When rains arrive even briefly, water infiltrates cracks and joints, adding stress that can loosen blocks. The process is incremental, then sudden. Small changes accumulate until isolated pieces detach, feeding rubble that collects along the base. Across the basin, similar reappearances add context. The canyon's original architecture, narrow passages, steep walls, sudden steps in elevation, returns to view. Before the dam, the Colorado River and its tributaries carved this network of channels, now resurfacing as the reservoir recedes. The wall's path aligns with this framework, helping outline former contours on the canyon floor. As more of it emerges, it may clarify how these layers were emplaced and altered over time. Human activity adjusts with the shoreline. Routes once accessible by boat now require overland travel across uneven ground. Infrastructure that supported recreation and navigation, ramps, slips, markers, sits out of position. The distance from these fixtures to water increases year by year, reshaping how people move across and experience the place. The wall, geologic, unhurried, becomes a quiet marker within this transition from water-dominated to land-forward terrain. Variability remains part of the story. Seasonal snowmelt can slow the descent, occasionally nudging levels upward. Management decisions shape releases, balancing downstream needs. Yet the broader trend has leaned lower, exposing more ground than is covered again. In this cadence, the wall may see segments briefly resubmerged, then revealed once more, its visibility waxing and waning with each cycle, while the long-term arc continues toward exposure. Viewed alongside other markers, the wall helps illustrate scale. Mineral bands, stepped beach terraces, stranded moorings and grounded docks, each add a line to the record. Together, they outline the pace and extent of change. Sections once well below the surface now stand fully in air, others remain partly submerged. The boundary separating them moves with levels, revealing new details along the formation, while subtly altering stretches already in view. Farther along the canyon, echoes appear, shorter, less continuous features with similar character. Some take the form of isolated ridges. Others step down like terraces toward remaining water. Each adds nuance to the map beneath the reservoir, reinforcing that the lake covers a complex architecture, not a simple bowl. In that context, the wall's prominence makes it especially useful, an unmistakable line that calls attention to what is changing. As more of the formation rises above the waterline, continuity strengthens the case for natural origin. Its alignment follows canyon curves and bedding planes rather than crossing them. Where fractures intersect, blocks may offset slightly, but the overall line persists. The impression of uniformity comes from layered stone and erosion working along a plane, geology tracing straightness in a landscape otherwise composed of sweeping arcs and broken faces. Up close, textures refine the picture. Uniform sandstone beds feel dense and even underfoot. Interbedded, finer layers lift as thin plates or crumble into grains. Edges, once planed smooth by years underwater, start to grain up, etched by wind-blown sand. Small collapses collect as aprons at the base, shifting the profile from vertical to subtly sloped. None of this requires recent construction, only time, material contrasts, and exposure. The canyon's wind is a steady sculptor. Fine silt lifts, arcs, and resettles. Coarser grains skip and peck at softer beds. Over countless passes, small fractures widen, marginal pieces loosen, and the face reorganizes. Occasional rainfall, brief but focused along cracks and joints, pries at edges and lubricates movement. With each season, the wall trades crispness for texture, still legible, but increasingly a record of exposure rather than submergence. Meanwhile, the broader basin narrates in parallel. Areas once defined by open water now display exposed rock, sediment flats, and emergent benches. The reservoir's footprint looks more intricate, its outlines set by the pre-dam canyon rather than a simple shoreline. From above, the pattern reads like a branching tree, channels within channels, each adding perspective on how far and how unevenly levels have fallen across arms and coves. In places, vegetation takes tentative hold, grasses and small plants stitching across damp sediments as they firm into crust. Elsewhere, surfaces remain too unstable or too recently exposed to anchor roots. Wind draws lines in sand that change day to day, while heat and cold expand and contract the rock beneath. The living and the inanimate move together, each reshaping the other at a pace set by water's absence. The record of decline is legible in bands and benches. Mineral stains form level lines, stepped shorelines echo past stands of water. Read together, spacing between markers reveals tempo, broad gaps for faster drops, narrow spacing for slower periods. The wall intersects these clues, its emergence timed to crossings that fix when certain segments first saw air and how long they've weathered since. At human scale, stranded infrastructure feels immediate. A buoy anchor set into mud like a rivet. A dock section tilted and dry. A channel marker marooned beyond reach of hulls. Each object, built to float or touch water, now sits inland, measuring distance in footsteps rather than wake. Their quiet displacement carries the larger message. The baseline has shifted, and with it, the way this landscape is used. Through it all, the wall remains the most conspicuous line. Its straightness relative to the canyon's curves invites close observation. Its exposure offers a chance to study processes directly: layer thickness, fracture orientation, grain size, rather than inferring them beneath water. In a changing reservoir, it acts like a ruler laid across time, translating complex shifts in level into a feature that eyes can follow. Understanding here depends on balance between inflow and outflow, between what is submerged and what is revealed. As long as inflows remain modest relative to releases, levels trend low and more of the canyon returns to view. Short-term pulses may interrupt the descent, but the overall trajectory governs what remains exposed. In that framework, the wall's future looks increasingly dry, its line lengthening with each incremental drop. Even so, year-to-year variability matters. Snowpack, monsoon bursts, and management choices can nudge the hydrograph, lifting levels briefly, then easing them down again. During such intervals, segments of the formation may slip back underwater, only to reappear later. The visibility of the wall is therefore dynamic, but the broader trend, over multiple years, points toward longer periods of exposure and a continued unveiling of this canyon's original forms. In newly uncovered coves, patterns shift by the day. Wind stripes fresh sand across flats. Thin crusts fracture under weight, then heal as dampness returns overnight. Pebbles align like tiny compass needles along currents of air and slope. The wall, towering above these delicate traces, registers change in slower strokes, its edges softening, its debris apron thickening, while the surface below redraws itself endlessly. Where the wall's plane meets irregular joints, the face breaks into a mosaic. Blocks shift millimeters at a time, guided by fracture sets that predate the reservoir. Occasional pops echo when a crack relieves, or a tab loosens and skips to the apron below. The larger line persists, but its surface becomes a patchwork, evidence that straightness at landscape scale coexists with complexity at the grain and block scale. Look outward, and the canyon's architecture frames the line. Narrow channels pinch, then open into chambers. Benches step down in tidy increments, then drop abruptly to depths still underwater. The wall often rides these transitions, tracking boundaries where layers changed during deposition or were stressed during uplift. Its path effectively sketches a cross-section of history, sediment laid, stone raised, faces weathered, condensed into a single continuous mark. View it this way: the wall is less a mystery than a teacher. It demonstrates how planes of weakness guide erosion, how grain size and cementation affect edge retention, and how water and air sculpt differently. It also underscores the reservoir's temporary hold on the landscape beneath. Water hid, but did not erase. As levels change, memory returns, layer by layer, ledge by ledge, until the canyon's plan is legible again. The implications reach beyond a single feature. A reservoir long perceived as stable is now plainly dynamic. Each step down in level reveals ground unseen for half a century or more, inviting renewed surveys and updated maps. The wall anchors those efforts, a line that can be relocated and measured from year to year, turning a changing lake into a field laboratory that is, quite literally, uncovering its subject as it goes. None of this requires exotic explanations. Straight lines occur in nature when layered rocks meet consistent forces and time. The scale argues against construction, and the formation's integration with surrounding geology supports a natural lineage. With more of it visible, that reading strengthens, bedding parallel, canyon-aligned and variable in ways stone should be. What seemed improbable becomes expected once the full context is restored. If levels stabilize temporarily, the wall may pause in place, neither advancing nor retreating, its surface continuing to weather at today's elevation. A rise could submerge a section, softening its edges again. A renewed drop would reverse that, extending the line. Through these swings, the feature remains a dependable narrator, its state reflecting the reservoir's balance in real time, a stone litmus along a changing shore. The longer view still depends on water coming in. Without a sustained increase in inflow, exposure tends to outpace resubmergence. Each incremental drop lengthens shorelines and unveils the canyon's original features, including this wall. Over years, those additions accumulate into a transformed sense of place, one that resembles more and more the pre-reservoir map, even as water continues to move through the system that made the lake possible. What the wall ultimately offers is clarity. It distills complex processes, sedimentation, uplift, erosion, hydrology, into a single, graspable line. It is geologic history made legible at human scale, appearing not because it is new, but because the water that once concealed it stepped aside. In that sense, it is both artifact and instrument, a relic of deep time and a present-day gauge of change. As viewers, we inherit the vantage that change provides. A canyon once hidden by water opens again, not in a rush, but steadily enough to watch. The wall's presence keeps the scale honest, a line you can trace with your eyes from bluff to bay. It is a reminder that landscapes are not fixed pictures, but conversations between rock and river, lake and air, time and light, continuing now. If this breakdown helped you see Lake Powell's changing story more clearly, and you want updates as new sections emerge, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. It helps this reach others following the Colorado River's ongoing chapter. And if you found value here, tap that hype icon. Your support lets us return with fresh visuals and careful context as the shoreline and this remarkable wall continue to come into view.